So just to kind of quickly share a quick or a brief a summary of who Dr. Nita is. She is going to be presenting along with her student on the topic called Students Making Sense of Migration Poverty. She's currently a lecturer in the Department of Politics and Public Administration at the University of Limerick in Ireland. She teaches development studies with a focus on the environment, poverty, gender, so civil society organizations, and migration. Evelina, who's her student and who's joining us today, is an international business graduate from the same university as well, and she has a keen interest in politics. She has participated in the European Youth Parliament for the Human Rights Committee, and as I mentioned, she is a student of Dr. Mishra's Issues in World Politics class. She will be speaking on her personal experience of migration and poverty, as well as the process of learning through the migration project that she did with Dr. Mishra. So without further ado, Dr. Mishra, the floor is yours.
Thanks, thanks, Zaki. I'm going to try and make it kind of quick so that we don't take a lot of time. I'm so happy to be here, and what I am going to be presenting is students making sense of migration and poverty. And this presentation is dedicated to all my students of Politics 4048, Politics and Public Administration module in department in University of Limerick. So, and thanks Evelina for being there. I'll just share 2 slides and then I'll bring you back here. What I wanted to share was, we are going to be hearing lectures on what migration is, what it is not, and different versions and different stories about it. What I was trying to do was how my 4th year students responded to my call for an assignment to prepare a project. Of students all of them were from the arts, humanities, and the social sciences faculty. And in that, most of the students were from BA in criminal justice, from law, from just plain BA, or from bachelor's in science, arts in journalism and digital communications, in psychology, European studies, international business, where Evelina is from, and BA in applied languages. Just to follow up, Evelina will share her insights into the process after I discuss details of the assignment so that you get an idea why I brought Evelina here. Or I did tell all my students to, if they had the time to join in, but most of them are either on holidays or working, and Evelina has taken out a time to say what she learned from the process. So what I asked the group for the entire semester was, prepare this project on what they thought was migration all about, because and that would have helped them. It was a 40% project, and that would help them with critical analysis and how they present. The content was important, and the whole preparation process was very important. The idea was that they engage with group project members. The groups were divided according to tutorial groups. I had 11 eventually. We had 11 groups which presented their project. They were also supposed to submit a 750-word outline of the research they had taken, which included 250 words on how they themselves contributed to the group, which meant that there would be no free riders and nobody would be getting marks for not doing anything. One of the most important aspects which I did, which I announced in the class, in the first class itself, was they should bring an object or more, which represents an aspect of migration for them, and tell us why they chose that particular object for the project. And there were all kinds of things. I will tell you what all came up from that, which was quite interesting. I also gave them the freedom to decide. They could either focus on refugees, asylum seekers, globetrotters, expats, migrants, stateless peoples, or citizens, which would help them understand the concepts, reality, people, and their, and the students decide what they wanted to do. They could also link it to the Sustainable Development Goals and see which are the SDGs that were missing, or what could they come up with. So the whole idea was to imagine. There was to prepare a Google site and some PowerPoint slides on all of this. One of the things they did, so there were 11 groups, sorry. And some adjustments were made according to individual needs, and they worked over a period of 7 weeks in tutorial periods because that was the best time they could meet and work together as they were from different courses. So I'm just going to give it to Evelina, my student who is here today.
Evelina. I study international business, and I was a student of Dr. Mishra's Issues in World Politics module. It was a great module, and I learned so much, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to speak about it in this seminar, because it was very engaging. So just briefly, my migration story: I lived in 4 countries, and I went to 5 different schools by the time I was 11 years old. So as a 12-year-old, I used to say that I'm an expert in migration because most 12-year-olds didn't have what I had at the time. And just like Dr. Thomas Poggi said, you know, the driving forces for my family, the push factors, was poverty. I was living in Lithuania, and it was not in the early 2000s, it was not as developed as it is today. So we were just kind of seeking a better opportunities and going from one country to another. So it didn't really stop at one. We kind of tried 4 different countries by the time we found a place that was best for opportunities for us. And so one of the biggest driving forces was the European Union and the kind of freedom of movement around 2004 and 2007, when it was easier to migrate. And I went from Lithuania to Spain to the UK to Ireland, back to the UK. So yeah, and then just in terms of the module, it was a very hands-on way of learning about migration and poverty. And I think with topics like that, they can be, you know, poverty especially can be kind of sensitive. Poverty comes in all different types of ways, and there's different scales of poverty. And learning about it in kind of a hands-on experience was really good with topics like this. And also what Dr. Mishra did, she centered it around this UN Sustainable Development Goals, which was really, really good. I've never really had a module being taught like that, where we have something we have migration, we have poverty, but we also have the sustainable goals to constantly kind of link with, and a concept that we're always kind of coming back to and integrating throughout the whole module, whether it was for the project or for the essays we had to write. So it was a very good way of kind of deep learning and not just surface learning. So as Dr. Mishra said about the object and bringing in an object that symbolizes migration, that was one of my favorite parts of the module. I think it was very personalized and immersive, and you could kind of reflect, and you felt involved in the module. And I actually brought in an orange because it was my presentation was during Easter Orthodox, and we actually eat oranges, what my family does during that time. So for me, it kind of meant that it doesn't matter where I am, if I'm away from my family, away from my country, my values and my traditions stay the same, and they come with me everywhere I go. And I think that's really important with migration, is that you bring your identity with you to every country that you go to. So the physical aspect of rather just doing a PowerPoint presentation and actually bringing in the object was different, and it was very engaging. And then, of course, we had our group project where we, as a group, had to pick any kind of migration story we wanted to focus on, which was really great, having that freedom of choice, especially in 4th year, to kind of do what you want to do. But at the same time, we got to deep dive into one topic. So we did the US border migration, US and Mexico, and we just learned so much by just going, 5 of us learning about the one topic. But then at the same time, we got to learn about everybody else's when we were listening to, so we kind of got to cover a broad range of migration stories. And yeah, it was nice to see my peers' perspective of migration and how everybody differs with their migration stories at the age of 20, 21 to 23 years old. And yeah, so these are just a few snapshots of our Google site. It was actually really fun to switch it up. I don't know if anybody here is a lecturer, switch it up, from the usual Microsoft PowerPoint presentation to something different like a Google site, because you have to kind of learn how to use it and you're more engaged and involved. So we just kind of, covered topics of, the background of the migration story, why it happens, the reality of the migrants, the linking in with sustainable development goals. And we also had a look at some insights through real migrant stories. And in the end, actually, when we finished our presentation 2 weeks later, we found out that Title 42 ended, which was what allowed the US to kind of bring the migrants back to Mexico on the grounds of COVID-19. So that actually ended literally 3 days ago. So it was nice to kind of still be engaged with the module, find out something new, something that we did a project on. But yeah, overall I had a really good experience, and it was a great way to learn about a topic. And I just learned so much about migration and poverty and everything in general. So that would be my story. I will pass you all back to Dr. Mishra now. And that's all I have to say. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks a ton. Thanks a ton, Evelina. That was really nice, short and quick. So can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So as you heard from Evelina, what I have tried to do, Evelina was in one of the groups. So I've tried to condense, summarize what were the findings that emerged from all 11 groups and what some of the things that stood out. So the idea of migration differed for the students, and the topics ranged from the Irish migration to the US, to Irish citizens in Australia, Mexicans on the US border, migration between the Netherlands and the Dutch Caribbean, again, sorry, I seem to have repeated here, Yugoslavian migration, internal, external, what it meant. And they had different kinds of example. The Rohingya refugees as a humanitarian crisis, environmental climate migration, and the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the climate crisis in Bangladesh, Pakistan, Yemen, Syrian refugee crisis, all of these topics came up. And what was interesting was in many of these, they also had policies highlighted, they had solutions that they wanted to advocate, and they came up with a few things. What I've tried to say, add here is some stood out, some creative initiatives. So one group did interviews with rural to urban migrant students at the university where we were teaching, where I teach. So that was kind of interesting that students could conceive of migration from rural areas to urban, exactly like what Teresita was saying about the domestic workers, for example, moving from rural parts of a country across borders or within borders to cities. So, and there were discussions on prejudice and facing a colonial past, especially in the Dutch one. In one of the projects was very powerful. So the students say it forces people to face their dark colonial past firsthand, which may cause discomfort in the classroom. The traditional and normative colonial-centric perspectives were being challenged. And this was from the Netherlands and the Dutch Caribbean, a kind of interaction of going, from the Caribbean students going to mainland Europe. An interview with a Kosovan migrant student in University of Limerick says that he never encounters racism in Ireland as a Kosovan, but he experiences it daily as a Muslim. So that was kind of interesting. And then one of the projects focused on, in fact, this student came up to me and said, can I please write on animal migration, due to climate crisis? A group is in two minds, should we not? So they did both, half of it was on human migration and half of it was, how animals have been migrating due to the climate crisis. Then there were, the impact of COVID-19 in refugee camps, especially in the Syrian context or in the Myanmar context. The importance of photographs selected for the presentation. There were also a lot of video links embedded and a lot of policy level stuff, embedded on some of the Google site presentations. What was also interesting to note that none of the groups focused only on Ukrainian migrants in Ireland, although the Irish media was full of it on a daily basis. And that's quite interesting. That would have been one of the easiest things to do for them. So what my students were doing, like Evelina has also pointed out, they were situating themselves in the project, and that was my main object. Students related migration to objects which varied from a rugby t-shirt, chains, headphones, spectacle cases, fridge magnet, small purse, shoebox with pebbles, miniature glasses, passport, tin whistle, a phone, a hat, photographs, etc. Some of the interesting ones, so these are things that some of these students carry everywhere with them. Some interesting ones were as follows. This book by Frank McCourt, Angela's Ashes, which is a memoir recounting the author's experience of growing up in poverty in Ireland and the hardships experienced, which led him to migrate to the US, for example. Some spoke about diaries, the jerseys, and photographs of a great-grandmother who emigrated to New York with a sister in 1925 and who did return to Ireland on her own. Imagine 1925 and those ships cross on a chain. Many people, Irish people especially, kept their faith to keep them going. What are the things that kept them going in that poverty and, you know, migrate as the status as an immigrant? Immigration also helped many religions grow more popular and well-known. And the smell of food, you know, roast beef, especially if you're Irish. Connecting it back to migration, the backpack inherited from a grandmother represents one of the students, how one's whole life can be reduced down to a few objects. It's like backpacking over Europe, for example. One of the students had a necklace made of sky silver manufactured where the family is from originally, which is an island in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. A lamp traveled from Louth, Limerick, Netherlands, and Greece. Migration means building a new home away from home, which the lamp allows her to. So these students were really thinking and reflecting, and that was amazing for me. So what it was doing was building their capacity. For example, the group project facilitated discussions amongst their group members on what migration meant to them, what pictures symbolized it for them, and what was most important to them, and how would the group collectively select the final topic for the project. I think these were very important skills, especially bringing forth skills of negotiation, listening to each other, some dissonance, which is normal, pursuance, and a lot of learning from each other through research and feedback. You had to convince everybody else in the group that this is what we should be doing on, focusing on. And preparing a Google site, you know, was new to most students. It's nowadays, you know, this digital enhanced, it's kind of, a lot of universities are making sure that the students are digitally enhanced, you know, they know how to use these skills. In this case, what they were also doing was comparing and contrasting and advocating what they thought should be done by policymakers. You know, this enabled their critical thinking. So one of the groups said, like group 10 said, the over documentation of the Rohingya crisis can serve as a lesson for the situation that is ongoing in Ukraine in the present. So I thought this was quite interesting. So my task as the teacher was not about the grades, but the learning process in this case, to facilitate students to position themselves in their work, to think through the project and make sense of a concept which was not very far removed from their own lives. Migrants were not people somewhere far removed outside there. All of us were migrants was the consensus students arrived at only when we all collectively, we went through this process of reflection. Just to end it, I must say, we co-create knowledge in the classroom, and I wish to honor that process. And thank you for listening to me, and thank you for inviting me to speak and allowing me to speak on what I wanted to. Thanks, Evelina, again.
Thank you so much, Nita. It seems like your class had a fantastic time learning, diving into a topic that is hotly debated and it seems to be taking center stage right now. And I'm sure they walked away from that having learned quite a bit from your class. Thank you for sharing your work on that.